This is the Listening Project podcast, sharing our stories to amplify our voices, a project of the RPA. We are Richmond organizers who have listened to residents who are the most harmed by some of the biggest polluters in our rich city. These are our stories.
How bribery, how lobbying, how politics really play into course with these things. And it's crazy because we've somehow managed to sacrifice our own well-being and livelihood for just, jobs. Like, we're kind of destroying, there's no future. We're destroying our planet and we're getting faster at doing it if we continue to let these corporations just run our lives. And they're trying to monopolize and, quantify everything that we do. It's ridiculous.
Hey everyone, I'm Danny. Happy to be back with you today. And I was lucky enough to talk to Alfonso, who you just heard from, who is a community member who is very passionate about local politics and all the ways that Chevron kind of impacts that, which you will hear all about today.
Hola, hola, it's Sol. Don't call me Mary, la profe, la prima. Excited for another episode. And the name of this episode is Polluting Politics. And what do we mean? We talked about Chevron and how it's polluted our air, water, and soil, our health. But another reoccurring theme that we constantly heard in our interviews was in the ways that Chevron pollutes politics. So we're excited to talk about this and really talk about how, as community members, we are fighting back and creating this collective power.
Hello, everybody. Alfredo here, back again. Thank you for joining us. Today, we're going to talk, like Marisol said, about the different ways in which Chevron pollutes our political environment, the ways in which they interfere with our democratic processes and try to create division to keep us under their influence. Yeah, so let's get started. One of the things that we asked our interviewees was about different ways in which Chevron affects the city as a whole, in our economy, in our local government, things like of that sort. And we heard a lot of different things. We're going to hear from some youth that you would probably recognize by now, Lisbeth, Anu, Christian, and Minerva. They're all young adults that grew up in Richmond and are now out and about organizing and doing a bunch of different wonderful things for the environment, social justice, education. So let's get started.
I feel like Chevron isn't even a part of the community. They're just like here. Mm-hmm. Like the people that work for Chevron, like we talked about, like they're not even like Richmond residents, like hardly any of them are. So I don't feel like they should have like any kind of like impact on our ability to self-govern.
They play a huge role. They are, they do not want to hold themselves accountable, and they do have a lot of politicians being behind them and not caring. They could just pay the politicians knowing, guys can shut them up and tell them to leave us alone, practically all of that. That's why they know they have literally strong power behind them.
It's almost hard to imagine it because you know how much money Chevron has, like, to make problems, quote unquote, go away.
Do you feel that Chevron has a grip on our community?
Yeah, they have way too much money. They can like buy out elections. I forget when, I believe it was 2012, but there was a certain, I forget, local elections where basically there was a lot of candidates sponsored by Chevron. Like there was advertising with like Chevron everywhere throughout the city. Like, so yeah, they also sponsor a lot of like local businesses. They have their own newspaper. Like they have ways to be powerful.
These politicians have been bought out. They've been bought out by Chevron, and that's why it's continuing to happen. And that's why they're still here, because they just have money and they're putting money in other people's pockets.
And as you could see from all of these folks, there's this central theme of Chevron and using their power to influence city politics. and they all kind of brought up different things, but I think the central theme is that they do have so much power, they have so much money behind them, and they're able to fund political campaigns, to pay out community organizations, to help push their initiatives and narratives. And that's a really powerful way that they move within our city.
Yeah, they touch on these like really central ways in which they really try to pollute our local, like political sphere. They put money into empowering groups or like specific people that advance, their own interests into community groups, knowing that among us that causes distrust, that it causes division because we don't trust the corporation because they are a fossil fuel corporation. And they use their money to spread disinformation. Let's now kind of shift and start talking about how they create their own narrative. Here are two community members talking about this.
Access to information and knowledge, then you cannot think critically. You pretty much, people are feeding you stuff that they know is not the truth, but they're going to feed it anyway because that's their agenda. There's a lot of people in positions in Richmond with hidden motives and secret agendas. And it's not for the benefits of the community. It's for the benefit of their own pockets, their own status. So unfortunately, when you have people in positions of authority that has access to information, real information, and they're giving the general public the wrong information, then you can't help but understand why they would think that, okay, yeah, Chevron has been great for Richmond. Most residents of Richmond is not even aware that there's only 2% of Richmond residents that are actually employed by Chevron. Only 2%. And what level of employment are they doing? Are they on the high level? Are they engineers? And so most of them are probably just like janitorial, custodian, and those kind of entry level or those kind of servitude, pardon me if I use that word, positions where you're not in the boardroom, you're not in the area where you're not invited to the table to have real discussions and to see what's going on in the community. I think for the most part, people may have that perception that Chevron is good for the community because they don't know that it's not. They don't know that there's just 2%.
I feel like they have a huge, I feel like a lot just because, I'm just thinking about, our news outlets, too, like the Richmond Standard. I remember before I knew that they were funded by Chevron, I would always read it, and I was just like, this feels very, you read it, and obviously news is always going to be kind of a
little biased.
Yeah, that's the word, bias. News is always going to be biased in some direction, but it was their bias was always so obvious. And I was always wondering, why is it that they're always, whenever it came to Chevron, they only put really good promotional things out. And whenever something bad happened, they were so quick to try to twist it or just be like, look at all this other great stuff. And I'm just well, they're, they have people just changing the narrative surrounding them in our city. That affects them. A lot of people read the Richmond Standard and they believe they read it and they're just yeah, no, Chevron's not that bad. Look at all the amazing work they're doing. Look at all the things that they So I mean, it affects that. And obviously if you're donating that much money, there's probably so much packed meetings.
And that was two amazing women in our community. Tracy, a community member, and Rio, another community member, here just really speaking their truths on Chevron's propaganda wheel and everything, all of the misinformation that they spread through what you heard Rio call, which is the Richmond Standard. For folks that don't know, the Richmond Standard is a fully funded Chevron news site. It is used as a tool by Chevron to try and influence public opinion. And it was created in 2014. And 2014, you're going to hear this in our episode, is a really influential year because of 2014 is when what Christian talked about in his testimonial, one of the biggest funded elections by Chevron to actually put in their local candidates against progressive city council members. And so Chevron created their own newspaper in their fight for this local election, and it continues to this day. And just a couple of weeks ago, in January 2022, if you're listening to this in the future, in January 22, the Chevron is now looking to hire so-called journalists for a kind of the future of fossil fuel propaganda for their own newsroom. And so that is something, not only did they create a newspaper, now they are looking for and to create a newsroom by journalists.
Yeah, the Richmond Standard really quickly became known throughout the community. Like I remember really, like, I mean, for me, it kind of felt like it was like out of nowhere. They were just all over social media. People were sharing their articles, and my friends were talking about them. Many of us didn't really know that the Standard was completely funded by Chevron.
Why does the Standard even exist then?
I mean, in their own words, literally their like statement that they have on their website, they say that the Standard is the #1 source for local community-driven news about Richmond.
Oh, Jesus.
They say their publication is meant to. I mean, but then afterwards they literally say that their publication is meant to be the voice of Chevron Richmond. And it I mean, literally doesn't get much clearer than that. They're pushing their narrative in a way that they are kind of painting this to be like, oh, this is Richmond news. This is from the people by the people.
Absolutely. And it's really interesting when you look at Chevron Standard and the Richmond Standard newspaper. A lot of times they talk about public safety issues. And if you know me, I'm all into public safety and public health. And the Standard loves to highlight threats to our safety, such as sideshows, shootings, loitering, dumping, anything that's illegal. But yet, in the everyday harms of white collar crime that is also illegal, they never highlight. They never talk about the flarings or the fires or the oil spills or even the complaints from workers that are expressing themselves around the company.
Yeah, and I mean, it seems like that is a perfect example of why one-sided publication is so harmful. It's really important that communities get unbiased, real information in real time. It's how we stay safe. And so I want to know more about what you guys think of, like, why this is such a big problem in the community.
I think like essentially it comes down to, like we can't really come together to agree on problems and priorities when we have so much, all this misinformation coming from sources that people genuinely think is credible, that they don't see this heavy bias that they have. If what I'm reading is talking day and night about sideshows and dumpings and shooting, and what you're reading about is talking about how the police are killing us, how we're all struggling to make ends meet, or how we're literally in the middle of a climate crisis, we're going to come to very different conclusions about what threats need to be dealt with. If we can't agree on what matters to all of us, we can't come together and act on it. It's this collective action problem that keeps them in power. They attempt to keep us down, and this really and they attempt to keep us down and tell us what the problems are that we're facing, rather than it being the other way around.
Yeah, and Alfreda, that is probably why you're going to be a force in the city. I mean, you already are, but I can see you being mayor, and I will vote for you time and time again, my friend.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and so we're going to hear from two really big supporters and political advocates in the community, Andres Soto and Eduardo Martinez, and let's hear from them.
And then by the end of World War II, these people who had gone to war were now saying, we want to have a union. And the Richmond Police Department was significant in supporting Chevron, in those days Standard Oil, in beating the workers and trying to break up their strikes and picket lines. That was in the late 40s. And again, it happened in the 1970s. So this is a common theme of the police department working on behalf of Chevron. So to this day, they are in political allegiance. And it is invariably the candidates Chevron support are also supported by what I call the cabal in Richmond, which is the Richmond Police Officers Association, Richmond Firefighters Association, Richmond Chamber of Commerce, Richmond Council of Industries, and then Chevron itself. And because of the progressive movement and the advocacy for housing in Richmond, we've seen now where the California Realtors Association and Apartment Owners Association have joined that cabal.
Yeah, the police and Chevron do their ads together.
What?
Whenever there's an election, the police, Chevron, Council of Industries, sometimes Chamber of Commerce decide who they want to endorse and support, and then Chevron and the police union, the Richmond police officers, pool their money to do ads against the candidates they don't like, and for the candidates that they like.
Yeah, and so you just heard from Andres and Eduardo, and they kind of talk about how embedded, how much of like this co-relationship the police and the police union have with Chevron, and how they work together to kind of get what they want and build their power within the city. And it's been a historical issue. It is still an issue today, and we're going to hear more about that.
So we heard Andres talk about this union between this marriage between the police union and Chevron in very early on, the experience he talked about with his kid. But 2 weeks ago, something very similar happened. Can you tell us a little bit about that, Sol?
Yeah. So my love for RPD is very deep. It's sarcastic. So essentially, I am a Reimagining Public Safety Task Force member for the city of Richmond, and I had gotten alerted of some news. The first time that I had heard around workers, the United Steelworkers, and their contract ending January 31st was not actually from a local news organization, not from the Standard, not from the Bay Area, but it was actually from RPD, Richmond Police Department, saying that there would be a massive disturbance at the refinery due to boycotts and protests and strikes. And again, it's just another prime example of what was happening in the 1940s that Andres talked about, that Chevron alerts the police to literally stop the United Steelworkers in their First Amendment right to legally and lawfully organize a demonstration to fight for their rights. But then it's great that our RPD is saying, hey, this is what's going on, everybody be on alert. But why isn't that money being spent on investigating high crimes? And it's just really infuriating that it's so easy to suppress a peaceful protest, a demonstration in front of Chevron with 20 cars out there, and not even actually go after people that are doing real harm to the community, not just in regards to crime, but to the massive crime that Chevron commits on our community every fucking day. And so it's interesting to see the police union working with Chevron, but then you have progressive coalitions, the Richmond Progressive Alliance, who are working to protect the workers. And so we really need to look at who's fueling which fires and on which sides.
Yeah, I feel like this is like a really important topic, and I've done a lot of research on this because I think talking about Chevron and the narrative that they create, you know, they tell workers that progressive governments want them out of jobs. They care more about the environment than putting, you know, workers being able to put food on their table for their families, and that environmental organizers have that similar kind of thing. And it's just interesting that when these things happen, right, the Richmond Progressive Alliance and other progressive movements are out there supporting workers. And, you know, RPD is making sure that Chevron is protected. I'm using air quotes. You can't see me, I realize. And so, you know, it's really important that we take that into account when we look at the political landscape in Richmond. And so, yeah, I think it's just, we're trying to bridge this gap, and it needs to be done.
Yeah, I think it's really important in having these conversations that we make clear the separation between Chevron as a corporation and Chevron's workers. The workers are not the billion-dollar corporation. The workers are just like you and I, you know, they're not the millionaires behind the corporation. They are simply people trying to put food on their table, you know.
Absolutely. I also just wanted to say another prime example, that not just progressive folks joining in any type of rally or boycott or protest, but also that City Council member Claudia Jimenez is making a resolution, and hopefully our City Council and Mayor will adopt the resolution in support of workers, and really saying that Chevron, we see what you're doing. Workers, their contract ended January 31st at midnight. Their main concerns were health and safety. That's it, health and safety. Mm-hmm. And yet Chevron is not prioritizing the health and safety of the workers, which is then putting our community at risk because we have subcontractors coming in to operate the refinery, and union workers that have seniority, that have all of the knowledge and experience to make sure that our community is kept safe and that the refinery is kept safe. And yet Chevron is ignoring and is not negotiating in good faith. And we have City Council members now saying we need to do something at our local governance, and creating a resolution is just one of the ways.
Mm-hmm. I think it, just to point out the irony of the workers, you know, expressing their grievances about health and safety, and Chevron literally just makes things less safe by kicking out, you know, by trying to hire these temporary workers that don't have, you know, all of the safety experience that the refinery workers have. But so, you know, not only does Chevron pin workers or attempt to, you know, pin workers against the community, they align against community members who support progressive values and like, you know, again, insert themselves into our democratic processes. Here, we're going to start talking a little bit more about 2014, which you heard earlier. Councilmember Gail McLaughlin is going to talk to us a little bit about what happened in 2014 and why it's so important.
In 2014 is always the big example I use. Chevron spent $3 million, over $3 million, about closer to $3.5 million to try and defeat our progressive candidates for office and to elect their Chevron-friendly candidates. But they failed terribly in their efforts. All the progressive candidates won, all of us won, and all of the Chevron-friendly candidates lost. So that was, you know, made national news. How did this, you know, it was a David versus Goliath battle. The news picked it up.
Yeah, and that's Gail. And she brings up so many good points, like that this is a larger pattern. And they do this on a city level, on national levels. And so we kind of dug into the research of this with the Othering and Belonging Institute from UC Berkeley. Shout out to Tara and Eli. Thanks, guys, for all the help. But yeah, so Chevron did actually invest over $3 million into the political campaigns, like Gail said, in 2014. And then in 2016, they actually spent more than $7 million on congressional lobbying and $4 million on lobbying just in the state of California. So that's for policies that are more friendly to fossil fuel operations. And then, yeah, we also found out that from 2009 to 2016, Chevron spent $61 million lobbying for the company in California. And that's more than any petroleum company just single-handedly, and they were only second to the Western States Petroleum Association, who represent multiple refineries. So yeah, and I just want to make one more point. This is all money that is going into creating legislation that will allow them to pollute more, harm more communities, and not money that is going into the safety of their workers, the safety of the communities that they're in. I mean, you want to talk about, oh, we don't have money to do the renovations that are necessary to prevent fires and, you know, oil spills. I mean, it's bullshit. So
absolutely.
I think, you know, on the one hand, we know that, you know, a lot of money goes to, you know, places like the Richmond Police Officers Association and the Richmond Standard. But then on the other hand, there's a lot of, you know, dark money that we spoke of today that goes into orgs that we don't really know about, you know, again, organizations that Chevron aligns with and then go to create this vision of them that we've talked about before as good neighbors, and talk about, you know, EJ, environmental justice organizers, as divisive, as, you know, against the needs and wants of the community.
Absolutely, Alfredo. And yet the community prevails.
Time and time again.
En serio, pero siempre. It's like we have to prevail. You know, they put so much money in 2014, and yet our community said, fuck off, Chevron. We don't want it. And I really want to bring in, if you haven't watched the, you know, Netflix docu-series called Explain, there is one series in particular called Whose Vote Counts, and Richmond, our beloved rich city. It's narrated by Selena Gomez. Shout out to her. If she ever wants to come through, say what's up. Definitely, Richmond is used as an example of the community seeing through this. The community saying no. That the episode in which we were featured in as a prime example is, can you buy an election? And it's literally talking about how much Chevron is talking about it. Even AOC is in this episode talking about how large corporations buy elections. And yet we said no. We said no to the fossil fuel companies. We said no to fossil fuel money and their lobbying. And we said, we are more powerful.
I think that's the biggest takeaway from this, is that the community is seeing through it. You know, of course, today they are still a massive influence in government. They have a lot of power, but the community is seeing through it. And we see this, you know, we see it here in Richmond with the, you know, progressive candidates from places like the Richmond Progressive Alliance. We have a majority of progressives in the city council. For the race for mayor in the coming months, Eduardo Martinez is very popular. He is super progressive. He started
environmental justice.
He worked as an educator at one of our local elementary schools. He's super down with the community, and the community is backing him. You know, these Chevron candidates in 2014, all of them lost. And this next election cycle, I guarantee you, they're all going to lose because the community is seeing through it. You know, we're seeing through the money, seeing through their influence, and I think we're in a good place.
Absolutely, absolutely. So shout out to our beloved rich city for always being the real ones. And right now we are excited to end on our usual listen up message. We will be seeing you next week in another episode. Thank you as always for joining us. And we have Gail, City Council member Gail McLaughlin, as our final hopeful message. So listen up, Rich City.
I just also want to add, Selena Gomez, if you're listening, you're welcome to be a guest on the show.
Yes.
Our community understands, our voters, our electorate understands that Chevron is trying to thwart the democratic process and trying to buy our elections. And they said, no way, they're not going to do it. And that was a big victory for all of us, because we did a lot of hard work throughout the campaign, educating the community. And it actually had built up over the period of years with us educating and saying, you don't have to give in to this oil company that's been in our city for 100+ years. It's clear you just have, you know, for too long, people would say, well, what can we do? You know, Chevron is this big giant behemoth, you know, maybe we could tweak this or tweak that. And we said, no, you could stand strong, stand together, and not let them run the show. And we proved it could be done in that 2014 election.
Man, I love you, Richmond. Pride and purpose. And salute, man. Stay up.
And I know I ain't the hottest, but I promise Rich City I got us. Believe me, I got you. You got me, I got you. You got me, I got you. Hey, Rich City, I'll never let you go. You don't know that I love you, Rich. You don't know that I love you, Rich. Rich City, baby.
Thanks for tuning in to the Listening Project podcast. A special thanks to the Richmond Progressive Alliance for making this podcast possible. The RPA's goal is to take power back from corporations and put it into the hands of the people. To learn more, visit their website at richmondprogressivealliance.net. Thanks so much.